Okay, so my talk is about GraphQL. I am a big GraphQL enthusiast. I don't know what that means, but I like GraphQL because I'm a nerd. And I'm going to talk to you about GraphQL. Amazing. Amazing introduction. You're welcome. There's actually not a lot of memes, which is pretty sad. Okay, so I'm going to start with the fact that I really love GraphQL. Like, to me, that's my doc. They're right there. And so I really like GraphQL. I think GraphQL is amazing, and GraphQL to me is bae. I also have an entire website just of meme photos of myself, and this is one of them. If you can't tell, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, "Ask me about GraphQL" in a GitLab jacket. I think I'm just like a tech company. I don't know, I just wear a lot of weird stuff from tech companies. I do that for free, so if you want to offer me shit, I'll use it. So, my name is Sara. Who knew? It's not like I've been here the entire morning. Sorry about that. So, as Jen said, I'm a developer advocate at a company called YLD. We are a consultancy based out of London and Portugal. I am originally from Portugal. I moved to Berlin about 6 months ago. Sorry. Do not ask me if I'm okay. As a personal thing, like, because since I did a lot of conferences last year, a lot of people thought I was a robot, so I started adding these two things so that people know I'm not a robot. I'm really into terrible, terrible movies. Things like Sharknado. They give me life for some reason. Like, I think I just really like watching people fail on screen and be like, "See, Mom, I did okay." And she's like, "Well, but you don't live in Hollywood." And I was like, "Mom, look at Berlin. It's great." Yeah. So I'm also really into football because as a Portuguese person, that's really all that we got. And the next person who I say I'm Portuguese and says Ronaldo to me, I swear to Jesus. God damn it. This even happened in Ukraine. And I'm like, how does it, fucking hell. Okay, I really adore Vue. Like, I mostly do React and Vue. And I really like Vue, and one of the reasons is the main reason that L'Oreal picked him. It's just the simplicity of it really attracts me to it. So usually when I want to create something that is more simple, that has forms, or something that's just a splash page, or something like that, I always use Vue. Also because I think the simplicity is just great. I feel like Vue is the Harry Potter of JavaScript libraries. And you're like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Just wait for it. Okay, so if you ever met anyone that truly hates Harry Potter, it's really hard. Like, there will be people who tell you that they don't like the movies. That doesn't count. Like, I mean, in general. Like, I met one person that truly hates Harry Potter. And I feel the same way, like, in the general JavaScript community and front-end community. Like, I know a lot of people who hate Angular. Who knew? And I know a lot of people who hate React, which is also valid. I've seen some weird shit. I once made a switch statement in a style component, so I get it. Yeah, that was not good. I think that's why people hate CSS and JS. So, but I've actually never met anyone saying I fucking hate Vue. Never heard of that, which is great. So, point proven. Unicorns. Okay, so there is this amazing thing by, thank you. There's this amazing thing called Vue Apollo that is done by Guillaume, and one of the speakers that we had today. So I'm basically just getting his work and getting free trips out of it. It's great. You're welcome. I flew KLM. It was great. So how do you do this? How do you actually integrate GraphQL into a Vue app? Okay, I'm not going to talk about the backend, even though there's this misconception, which is a good thing that Tim brought it up, that in the language that Sitecore uses, they actually have a GraphQL API. It's a very weird fact that everyone just assumes that GraphQL is a Node thing and a React thing, which is absolutely bullshit. It's absolutely a lie. Because it actually can be used with pretty much anything. Even really new languages like Rust and Elixir have GraphQL things. The problem was it was introduced at a Facebook conference, no, at a React conference by Facebook. So yeah, that's how. So first of all, install it. I normally use Yarn, mostly because at one point it was needed, and now I just memorize all the commands, so now I just go with Yarn. So you just npm install Vue Apollo, Apollo Boost, and GraphQL. So Vue Apollo is the integration for the Apollo core things into Vue. Apollo Boost is what has everything that you need under the hood, and GraphQL is, well, you know, GraphQL. OK, so what do you actually need to do? So you import the Apollo client. This comes from Apollo Boost. So if you've ever used GraphQL, not GraphQL, but Apollo in version 2, they had this really huge thing where you had to import like 5 packages. So they just got all those packages and made Apollo Boost. So you can import everything from it. So it's way easier to just get started. So you import Apollo client from Apollo Boost. You also import View Apollo from View Apollo. And you create a new Apollo provider. So you create a new View Apollo, and you pass it a default client. The reason why you pass it a default client is you can actually have more than one. You may not think that this is a great thing, but trust me, I've seen things in the React. Yeah, it wasn't good. So you can have more than one client, which is really good. So the only thing that is mandatory is a URL. That Apollo called a URI. I don't know. It always got to me. OK, and then you tell Vue, use View Apollo, please. That would be amazing. And Vue will comply and mount itself. I mean, assuming that you didn't screw up any of the above parts. So you're done. So you just set up GraphQL, which is great. So now you can actually do things with GraphQL, but you haven't done anything. So let's actually query some things, get some things from a GraphQL endpoint and query it. So all the examples that I'm using come from this website that I made a couple of months ago. Actually, like, I have no idea when I made this. But it's at awesometalks.party. This was a point where .party domains were like 60 cents, and I just went bananas with it. I have a domain problem, by the way. And basically, I always found it really hard to find really good talks on the internet. Like, I just went to this really weird rabbit hole on YouTube, so I just started collecting those and making a website with it. And it has a GraphQL endpoint. So what we're going to do is that all of the queries that I'm going to show you are actually real queries that I use on the website. Also, if you know any really good Vue talks, because we actually don't have a lot, I would please tell you to go to awesometalks.party and actually submit a talk. It doesn't have to be your talk. I mean, that's kind of weird if you do your own talk. I didn't add my talks there. OK, now that we clear that up, that's good. OK, so how do we do this? So the first thing that we need to do is import GQL from Apollo Boost. So what the F is GQL. So GQL stands for GraphQL Query Language, and it's basically a really simple way for you to state queries. So this is not an actual string. Like, you put it with template literals, but it's not an actual string. But using GQL, it actually transforms it into a GraphQL query. So the really good thing that I like about GraphQL is that it's what you see is what you get. So in this case, I am querying for all speakers. So you don't actually have to pass a name for the query. But if you intend on using any type of dev tools, it's good to not have all queries named query. I've been there. It wasn't good. So you give a name to your query. You can name it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be all speakers. You can name it chicken shortage if you want. It's fine. And then you say what actually you want to query. So on that website, I have imagine that it's a table in a MySQL database or something with all of the speakers. It's not an actual table, but imagine that. And so basically I say, I want all the speakers. But I went a little overboard with all the things that I have for speakers. So there's actually like things like continent and like, I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff with the speakers that I actually don't fill up because I'm not an actual stalker. So mostly of what I have is so that generates an ID, which I need for keys. It gives me back the name of the speaker. It gives me a photo. And that photo is a type of file, so I get the URL of it. So as you see, it's named URL, not URL. OK, never mind. Not URI. But so basically what this does is going to return me an array with the data. And in the data, there's going to be a thing that says all speakers. And for each of them, I will just have this. So there is no more overfetching. I will just have the ID, the name, the photo, and inside of the photo, the URL, which is great. So I don't have to check, like, oh, can you please just remove the continent, because I actually never put that in. So there's also a query component, which uses scoped slots. What up? Reference. OK, no. OK, so there is an Apollo query component. And you can also call this in your methods. I honestly prefer it this way, but it's also, I think this is a thing from also using React, is that I like this pattern. But if you don't like it, there are other ways to call your queries and your mutations, which you do it in the methods, which is completely fine as well. So you call a query. You say Apollo query, and the only parameter that you actually need to pass is the query. Great. So the way I do it here is that I just require the file. You can import it and use it in your data or something, but I just require the file. And since it's a common JS module, I need to get the default. You need to get the default. This may have happened to me. OK, so then you have a template. And this template has a scope into it. And the scope returns you the result. So the result is everything that it went to the server, or it went somewhere, and it came back with a result. So and this result has three things. It has the loading, the error, and the data. And one thing that you can notice here is that it has the loading. And that means that you know if it's loading. And that means that you don't have to set is loading flags on Vuex, which is great. So what do? So one thing that you can do is just check if it's loading. So you show an H3 and check VF loading. And if it's loading, just show me the loading thing. And if it's an error, just say to the user, something went wrong. It's probably your fault. I'm so sorry. Please update your browser. So, OK, so if none of these things happened, that means that we have speakers. OK, cool. So we have a data.all speakers, but do we have length? So we check if there's length. And if there is length, we can actually do a v4. And this is what I needed a key. And then I just show the image of the person. So there is no extra things that I need to ignore out of it. There's no extra anything, which is really good. And so I forgot this part. So this part means that if there is a VLs, that means that it's just empty. And you can just say there are no speakers. So you can also abstract this into its own component. So this is what I usually do. And basically, all the loadings and error states in your app should be the same usually. If they're not, like, please talk to your designers, because they kind of should. So you actually care about the data. So you can abstract all of that part and just get the data. OK, so let's say you have variables. So in this case, this is how GraphQL variables work. So you have a query, and in there, you pass it a name, and you need to tell it what type that is. So in this case, it's a string. No one has a name. I mean, I'm not going to say no one, but it's not very common to have a name that's like integers. So it's usually a string. Also, because you can just do string integers. And so basically, the way that this is set up on the back end is that I can filter with name contains, instead of saying, like, name is equal to. So for example, if you search for Sarah, it will show me and the cool Sarah. It will show both Sarahs. The real Sarah. But if I search just name equals, it will mean that if you search for Sarah and no H, only I would show up, which is not what you want, obviously. So, and then you get the exact same thing. So the rest is exactly the same. So you just say, I want the ID, the name, and the photo. So let's attach that to a vModel, and we just have a vModel of search. And then we have an Apollo query that the only thing that we give it is that we want the name of the variables that are here to match the name of the variable that we give it here. And in this case, it's name that we define at the top with the dollar sign. So variables and name equals search, because that's the name of our vModel. And then we just get the exact same thing. So we just do the exact same thing we were doing, and we just loop all over it, show if it's a loading, show if it's not. And we already got variables hooked up to a form, and the user can search. You can do all sorts of things with the search. You can filter by pretty much anything, which is great. This uses Postgres in the backend, which actually has a lot of flexibility when it comes to searches. So mutations. So the way GraphQL works is that you have two different types of things. One is queries, and the other one is mutations. So you can think of queries as get statements and mutations as post or put statements or delete statements. So mutations make mutations. And queries just get things. It's great. OK, so there's also a mutation component. OK, so how do you actually call mutations in GraphQL? So you first give it the keyword of mutation. And in this case, you actually need to give it a keyword. Because if you don't pass anything, you will assume it's a query. You don't need to give it a name, but for, sanity's sake, please give it a name. So you give it a name of create speaker. And in this case, you need to pass it something to actually create the speaker. In the backend, the only one that I have that is mandatory is the name. So I say, OK, you need to give me a name. And this is mandatory. And that's what the exclamation mark after string, this exclamation mark means is that it's a mandatory field. So if you don't pass it, it will just blow up in your face. It'll tell you why, but it will blow up in your face. So then you just call the mutation that's defined in the backend. That's called create speakers. And you say name is equal to the name that I give you, which, like I said, you can name anything. So in this case, I just get back the ID and the name. OK, so there's an Apollo mutation. And the way you do it is the same way. So you pass a mutation to it, and you get the default out of the mutation of the file. That did happen. OK, so in this case, we have an input that has a v model of name. So that means that your thing will be connected to it. And then with the variables, you just pass it the name equals name. Because of ES6, I don't have to say name, colon name. So I can just say name. And this means that as soon as I hit enter, yeah, that was not good. So as soon as I submit this form, that v model will go to the server and mutate the thing. So in this case, we also have template scopes. We also have slope, you know what I mean. We have templates with scopes in it. And in this case, this gets the mutation function, which by default is called mutate. You can call it whatever you want. I usually just call it mutate. And there's a loading and there's an error. So as soon as I submit, I prevent default. This is something that I think y'all just take for granted, the submit.prevent. But god damn it, is it good. I wrote so many less functions. It was great. So, and I just call mutate on it. And since I call mutate, it will automatically pass it the variables that I defined at the top, and it will create me the thing. OK, so that's cool. But one problem that this approach has is that it doesn't actually update the front end. So what we do is that we go to the back end and we tell it, OK, there's a new speaker. Please put it in the database, but I don't really update the front end. And I really want two-way data communication on this. So there is an update function. So as you can see here, on update, I am calling a thing called onUpdate. And this means that when, wow, OK. Is that Dutch? It is, thank you. Does it mean when? OK. So once the thing sends it to, makes your actual mutation on the server, it will run a function called update. And in here, I am saying that I want to run the method called onUpdate. And let's define this. So this is really weird, but I'll explain it. Gotcha, fams. So this gets the cache, and it gets the data that you pass to it. So in this case, the data that you passed was just the speaker's name, basically, which makes sense. OK, so out of the cache, what you can do with the cache is that the reason why Apollo is so good is because it stores everything in a cache. And you can use that cache as a data store, for example. You can use that cache as anything that you want. And you can also read queries from that cache, because it stores them in the same way that GraphQL works. So if you pass a query to your cache, it also will return you things. So what we're doing here is that we're getting all of the data from the cache, but we're reading the query of speakers, which is the thing that I said with all the speakers, basically. And well, out of it, I'm just deconstructing all speakers. You can get data.all speakers, the same thing. And you also can write a query to the cache. This is kind of misleading because you're actually doing a mutation, but it's cache.writeQuery will actually change what's in the cache. And by doing that, it will completely change the front end, because what the front end shows is what's in the cache, not what's in the server. And so you pass it a query. The query is speakers, so you want to query all the speakers, and the data that you want to pass is what you're actually going to change in the cache. So you get all speakers, so all the speakers that exist, and you concat the one that you created. So in this case, I have an ID and a name, so basically I concat ID and name, which I just deconstructed, but you can also do concat, and then name equals create speaker.name, ID equals create speaker.id. And then, so if you want to add things, so in this case, I just added a place kitten photo, so you can also add things like this. So you can, it's not forced to come from the user input. You can add these things yourself. So if you just want to add memes to everyone, you can do it. I'm pretty sure there's a meme API. If there isn't, can you please tell me, and I'll make it, like, real fast. It's fine. So there's also this really weird thing called type name. So this is what Apollo uses to know what the hell your things are. So when you query all speakers, it assumes that that type is a speaker type. And that's the type name that it gives you, so when it queries things, it can actually do that way faster, because it already defined what each thing is. Make sense? That's too many people for me to know. OK, so I have a demo of this on Code Sandbox. I'm not going to pray that the internet works, but I have a demo of this on Code Sandbox, and you can check it out. I will also share my slides, obviously, so you don't have to memorize this link. It's fine. And so another thing that you can do with GraphQL, and that you can do with Apollo, because of the way that the cache works, is to use it as a store. So you can actually use local state, and you can use mutations and queries to change your local store. So the store that you use is not just for data. There's other things like, oh shit, what other things are there? Okay, never mind. But there's other things like, no, I'm serious, like forms or like check if the user is online or random things that you may need to store forever, like the username, for example. You don't want to get that all the time, so you want to store that in a Vuex store or in any store, any type of object, and get it. You can actually store this in the Apollo cache. So you can make queries to the local state and to whatever you have on the server. So this means that you never shift, that's the word. You never shift your mentality. So when you're coding GraphQL, when you're making the queries, when you change to querying local data, you actually just do the same thing. You just write GraphQL queries, which is great. So yeah. So I know that I'm what's standing between you and lunch. So yeah, we're not really a fan with that. Okay, so this is totally not readable, so I'm going to do this. So all of my slides are at vue-apollo-magic, now.sh. And so you can check them out, and you can also check out the code sandboxes that I have there. And I think it's, honestly, as a person who's been using GraphQL for quite some time, I do think it's a really good step forward in terms of data, fetching data and mutating data. I think it's something that really oversimplifies the creation of apps, and I would really advise you to take a look at it. Also, please don't clap, because I'm also the MC, so I need to tell, like, really jokes before we go to lunch, so don't make it more awkward. And yeah, that's about it. What did I just say?